Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Lisa Longhofer. I'm the Executive Director of the Gray Muzzle Organization, and we are excited to have all of you here today. And I'm thrilled that jessicaDOLCE is here with us to talk about compassion fatigue. So before I introduce Jessica and turn the virtual floor over to her, please do feel free to ask questions. You can type them into the question box if you are joining us on Zoom. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can type questions into the comment section and we'll be sure to get those to Jessica. All right, so with that, I'm excited to introduce Jessica. She is a certified compassion fatigue educator who brings almost 20 years of experience working with and for companion animals to her coaching and online programs. She is an adjunct faculty member at the Maddie's Shelter Medicine program at the University of Florida and has worked with organizations such as the ASPCA, HSUS, and the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. She holds a Master of Science in Adult and Higher Education and certificates in stress management, mindfulness facilitation, and positive psychology coaching. And I'm sure she'll give this at the end, but you can learn more about her work at jessicadolce.com. All right, with that, Jessica, I will turn it over to you. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Perfect.
That was the perfect segue.
That was excellent timing.
Oh, okay, I'll turn off my sound now.
Thank you, Lisa. And welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today and allowing me to be in your world. So today we're going to talk about compassion fatigue or caregiver stress for people who either are living with animals who are seniors or might have a medical or a behavioral issue, or if some of you work with animals professionally, there's something for you here as well today. So I've been working with animals professionally for 20 years in animal shelters, as a dog walker and pet sitter, and I've been a compassion fatigue educator for the last 7 or 8 years. So my whole professional life has been around caring for animals at various times in their lives, including the end of their life, and companioning pet owners, my clients, as they take care of their senior pets and go through end of life decisions. So my whole job has been around these issues, but it's also my personal life, particularly the last 6 or 7 years. I have really been living this over and over with my own pets. And so I just wanted to introduce you to the animals that really informed today's webinar. And so on the far left, we have Boogie, who is my 13-year-old pit bull, and he is right behind me on the couch. I don't know if you can, we'll see if we can see him. He's under the covers, sleeping under there. So that's my gray muzzle, who is really always with me, and we're going gray together. And then in the middle is my cat Penelope, who passed away 2 years ago yesterday. And she passed away after a very long illness, kidney disease. And Penelope really taught me about what it is to care for a loved one who has a chronic, complicated medical issue, needing a lot of care and interventions medically. And, from sub-Q fluids to shots for anemia to syringe feeding her. She really, really taught me what it is to be with an animal for a long period of time as their needs continue to change, and ultimately how to let go. And then there's my girl Birdie on the far right, who passed away about 4 years ago. And she also passed from acute kidney disease. That really, the lessons she taught me were more about what it is to be with an animal in the last few years of their life as everything starts to change. So Birdie had old injuries that needed a lot of physical therapy. She had some cognitive issues at the end. She needed pee pads, the house training stuff. And so it was a very different experience with her. And each one of them and all of the pets I've had have taught me a lot, and really, I thought about them all throughout creating the slides for today. So I wanted you to meet them because they're my point of reference. So I start every single webinar with when I talk to animal care professionals, I always start with this quote from Dr. Remen, who wrote, "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet." And that's very much the case when you work in a helping profession. So for those of you who work with animals or caring for people, it's really unrealistic to think that what you're exposed to on the job isn't going to have an impact on you. It's normal to be changed by the work. But I also think this applies to living with senior animals and going through medical or behavioral challenges with them, and the walking that last chapter, that end of life chapter. And it is normal and reasonable and predictable that we will be impacted and changed by the suffering that they experience or we experience and the losses that we go through. And so I just wanted to kind of start off with this as I think an invitation towards self-compassion and normalizing how challenging this can be. But I did want to explore maybe what are some of the more specific stressors that pet caregivers experience. And so I threw some of these up here, and uh, I'll ask for your feedback in the next slide, but here are some of the things that I thought of from my own experience personally and professionally. One, it's just the cumulative nature of the stress of all of the day-to-day care, and potentially just the never-ending to-do list of things that you need to attend to day after day, right? There's no day off from it when it's your own pet. And along with that is the uncertainty and all of the constant change that comes every time their needs change. So when I think about my experience with Penelope, my cat with chronic kidney disease, every single time I thought I had our game plan in order, all of her medications and foods and this and that, something would change in her body, her needs would change. And I would go back to the vet and we would have to add in a whole nother layer of medications and then check on that with blood work. And then she wouldn't eat the food that she used to like. And so we'd have to go through 30 different cans of food to find the one that she liked. And so that kind of constant change and uncertainty was a huge stressor for me. Many of us experience anticipatory grief as well, and that's grieving the loss of our animals before we lose them. I feel that very strongly with Boogie, who is 13, and I don't know how long he'll be with me for, but I know that we're entering, the last years of his life, and so I'm anticipating that loss and really struck by that grief. But there's also the grief of, I think, losing the relationship that you used to have with them when they were in a younger body, and the things that you used to be able to do with them that you may not be able to do anymore. And so long before we actually lose them and experience the grief that happens after they pass, there is a lot of, there are many losses and anticipatory grief that add to our stress. I don't know, I'm sure I'm not the only one that struggles financially with, and all the worries that come with that, the sheer amount of care that all of my animals have needed, I think has earned me like a plaque over the specialty clinic door for being a frequent flyer there. And then many of us are feeling guilt about maybe what we can't afford to do that we would like to do, or feeling like we should be doing more, or we should know what to do when we don't know what to do. And all of that is, I think, exacerbated by the fact that a lot of people just don't understand. It can be really difficult to explain to your coworkers why you can't come to a morning meeting because you need to go to the vet again, or whatever stress you may be dealing with. So there's not as much understanding from, I think, our coworkers and our families about why we're willing to maybe go to the extent that we go to, or why we're feeling so emotionally impacted by caring for our animals. And so I was curious, that's what I could come up with as some of the big stressors. But I was curious, what are some of the stressors that you're experiencing with your own senior pet, or a pet that has a significant medical or behavioral challenge, or if you work with animals, what are some of the stressors that you're experiencing? And if you want to share that in the chat, I think it would be really helpful to identify some of the things that are, kind of accumulating in our own lives, and to make that explicit, because sometimes I think we don't even realize how some of the little things are really adding up. And maybe we can get a window into each other's experience as well. So if anybody wants to share in the chat, or if you're on Facebook, if you want to post in the comments, I would be really curious what I missed, or what you think needs to be added to that kind of caregiver's burden or stress that we're dealing with. Extra laundry due to puppy fostering. Yeah, extra laundry due to a lot of vomiting and accidents, stairs. Well, thank you, Kelly. I'm glad that you think I nailed the list. Yeah, damage in the home sometimes when animals are having accidents. Um, I know my whole house at one point was covered in yoga mats, so that my dogs weren't slipping on the hardwood floor. So stairs and hardwood floors are really become your arch nemesis. Anything else that you've been struggling with? I know for many of us during COVID, some of the stressors are not being able to go into the vet with our own pets. Yeah, damage in the home is a big one. I have some floors that have never recovered. Disruptions while working from home, which can add stress. A lot of times senior animals can't settle if they're having some discomfort. So if you're on all of these calls and they're pacing and panting behind you, lack of sleep due to bottle babies for sure. For me, there was a lot of lack of sleep when my animals were at the end of their lives. They were getting up in the middle of the night, needing to go out more. So it's like returning to being a puppy again and remembering meds at different times of the day. Absolutely. Your whole schedule becomes around medication. Rebecca, you just lost your dog. I'm really sorry to hear that, who is severely disabled for over a year. And yeah, so maybe something you'd add is the stress about making end of life decisions. Absolutely. And pressure from others to make that decision before you're ready. I would say that that's the biggest stressor. I mean, it is it's the toughest decision I think that we make as pet owners, and anticipating having to make that decision is massively stressful, as is the pressure that we should know, that we will know when it's time. Often we don't know, and that really increases our stress as well. So not being able to figure out what things your senior dog is going through that are normal aging versus something that's serious. Mary Beth wrote, yes, absolutely. And you find yourself wanting to take her into the vet more to check things out. Right, we lose a sense of trust in ourselves. It's hard to know what is okay. Friends who didn't understand making preemptive decisions for euthanasia, adjusting your daily routine and personal mental health after your pet passes. Yeah, to be honest, in this webinar, I didn't even go into the after we lose them. That's a whole conversation in and of itself. Really that we're not okay, and we're not okay for a long time, and it's really hard to manage our lives while we are doing the really exhausting work of grieving. And so absolutely, all of that contributes to our mental health and our physical health as well. So thank you for sharing some of this. MH wrote, difficulty in finding a vet who can provide a realistic evaluation of their condition. Yeah, and so you would have liked to have had a vet who could have diagnosed your dog's severe spondylosis, so you could have known how to help him. Birdie and my dog Boogie both have spondylosis, so my heart goes out to you. I know exactly what it is to live with that. And the stress of making a euthanasia decision, potentially early, to avoid suffering for your pet. Exactly, trying to figure out the timing of this so that they don't suffer more than they have to is incredibly difficult. And then people who don't understand canceling plans to spend time with ailing animals. I spent my New Year's Eve a couple years ago on the couch with Penelope, so I understand that intimately. So thank you for sharing. Feel free to keep sharing in the chat, but I think this just kind of fleshes out what it is that we're dealing with here. And I want to make it clear that stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. We need a certain amount of stress in order to perform and focus. I feel stressed right now because I want to do a good job for you. And so I feel some stress now, and that's okay because it's helping me to perform, to remember what I want to say to you all. Stress is only bad when it really tips into that more chronic stress or distress, when it's acute and it's more than we can handle, we're overwhelmed by it, or it's just this chronic cumulative stress. And really, so when we're talking about bad stress, we're talking about distress, and that chronic exposure to stress certainly contributes to us feeling really fatigued, anxious, depressed. That's when we can have mental and physical health outcomes that are really negative. So just to be clear, it's not bad that we experience stress. It's really that chronic nature, I think, or some of these more acute traumatic situations that we deal with that we really want to attend to. So just to kind of get us all on the same page, I thought I would define compassion fatigue. There are 100 definitions of compassion fatigue. The academic world is always fighting about it. But one that I think really resonates for me and the people I work with is that it's the emotional, physical, social, and spiritual depletion that causes a decline in our desire, energy, and ability to feel caring and to be caring for others. So it is this very profound depletion that causes us to feel less caring and we behave in a less caring way. And so it's really in the title, it's the fatigue of our compassion, or more accurately, it's the fatigue of our empathy. We become desensitized, numb, and this is really because of how intense that depletion is. Now, not everybody who experiences caregiver stress is going to experience compassion fatigue, but I just wanted to put it out there and define it so we have a sense of what it might be. I think for many of us, we're really just moving along a continuum where there are some days where we have stress and it's manageable. Sometimes that stress becomes more acute or overwhelming or traumatic, and we're experiencing distress. And then particularly for those of us who are dealing with many months, if not years, of managing chronic behavioral or physical illness, that might start to push us into compassion fatigue. You know, we're really becoming physically depleted, emotionally exhausted, and we may find that the way that we are relating to others and ourselves starts to change. But for most of us, I think we're just kind of moving somewhere on the continuum. And all for the rest of the webinar, every strategy that I share that can help wherever you are on the continuum. So just to flesh out compassion fatigue, just for one more slide, there are some kind of hallmark signs of compassion fatigue that are worth looking for. And these would be things, if you see them, they would be persistent and really having a negative impact on your life. So not just every once in a while, it would be human to be exhausted or feel frustrated every once in a while. But if this is becoming really chronic and persistent and having a negative impact on your life, then it might be a symptom of compassion fatigue. So if you are feeling really physically or emotionally depleted, really beyond the average kind of tired, it's a real profound exhaustion. You might find that you've become very isolated. Your immune system can get compromised. So you're sick a lot, or maybe you have headaches all the time or digestive problems. You might find that you have a really short fuse, you're frustrated a lot, or resentful of the demands being put on you by your pet, by coworkers, by family members. You know, anybody asking you for anything really triggers a lot of resentment. You may have trouble sleeping, staying asleep, falling asleep. You may be sleeping all the time, but it's a change in your sleep. Anger and irritation, small things become really big deals. You may not have a life outside of caregiving after a while. It's just this one role, and you lose your hobbies and your self-care and your relationships. Sometimes we're using substances to numb out those intense feelings of sadness or anger, or we're just trying to self-medicate so we don't feel stressed. So that's, you know, alcohol, drugs, food, the internet, shopping. It can be almost anything. A lot of us become very hypervigilant. We're always scanning for danger. It's very hard for us to relax. And then again, this last one is really the hallmark symptom of compassion fatigue, which is becoming very desensitized to those around us and ourselves. It's with us all the time. So we're not able to feel a lot of compassion or empathy. We're kind of checked out, and we may not feel much of anything. And that's just not a place that we want to be professionally, at work, or personally either. And so that's one that we want to really look out for. And so again, you know, it may not be compassion fatigue that you're experiencing right now. Quite frankly, we're all incredibly fatigued and hypervigilant and isolated because of COVID. And I love this little graphic from Dr. Deb Thompson, who reminds us that prior to a year ago, in January and February of 2020, I'm sure that you had problems in your life and stress in your life before COVID entered into our existence. And then COVID comes in, and then we have wildfires out west and political unrest and that election and racial violence, and then Texas has a big storm, and I mean, there have been non-stop stressors, challenges, crises, emergencies in our lives over the last year, and we didn't enter into it well rested and stress free. We came with pre-existing problems. And so all of this is to say, if you're feeling exhausted and um, emotional and resentful or frustrated or whatever you're feeling right now, it is a totally normal response to what we've all been going through. So much of our resources internally and externally have been funneled towards just trying to cope with everything that's going on in the world, then what's going on in our lives with our pets, and then we have to show up and maybe do our jobs. And so if it's been hard for you to focus or feel motivated or energized to do your work, again, totally normal. We have very, very little left over to do that kind of work, given how much we're coping with. So whatever we want to call it, or whatever the reason may be, most of us are really struggling right now, period. And then when you add the emotional and physical and financial stress of caring for a senior pet at the maybe towards the end of their life, we have even less of a slice of that pie left over to function well. So we can't really stop some of the things that are stressing us out. We don't have a lot of control over COVID. We can't stop our pets from aging. So these difficult things are going to keep happening to us. But when we feel like we don't have any control over the stressors in our life, it only increases our stress more. And so it's really important that we find a way to find a sense of control over the things that are stressing us out. I don't know if you can hear it, but my dog Boogie is having a very vivid dream and is barking and running in the background. So if you can hear that, that's what that is. So we want to find a sense of control over the things in our lives that are stressing us out. Sometimes we have the ability to exert some control over the situation itself, whether that's wearing a mask or taking our pet to the veterinarian and getting a new treatment plan. But a lot of times we just don't have control over the situation. And so then we really need to find a sense of control by focusing on how we're going to cope with what we can't control. And to some degree, that's really what we're focused on today, which is what are the skills that can help us to cope with all of the stress that is inevitable and unavoidable in our lives. And so the first strategy is self-regulation. Hey, Bug, are you having a good dream? I don't know if you guys can hear him. He's really going to town. So our first strategy is self-regulation, which is really the skill of being able to quiet our very overactive stress response. So that's our fight, flight, or freeze response. And all of those stressors that you shared in the chat and that we've been going over, these are all things that create a sense, that we feel that life is unpredictable, uncertain, we feel out of control, we feel unsafe, and all of those things activate our fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we're living in that chronically activated state is when we're really moving into distress and some of those negative health outcomes. So self-regulation is about making choices that help us move from that state of activation to a more calm, grounded, rest and digest, rest and repair state, so that we can feel more steady, we can think clearly, and we can stay connected and empathetic with ourselves and the animals and people in our lives. And it's really important. The think clearly part is important, because when we're in fight or flight, when our stress response is really overactive, it really prevents us from thinking clearly. We can't access our more rational brain. And so we wind up behaving in a much more reactive way. And one of the reasons why our stress response is so overactive is because of something called the anticipatory stress response. I don't know if you've read this book. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. But Robert Sapolsky reminds us that for most animals on the planet, stress is a short-term, acute crisis, after which either the stressful situation is over with or the animal is over with, right? You either outrun the lion or the lion eats you. One way or another, it's over. But for human beings, what we do is we sit around and we think about all of the things that we're worried about. We worry about making that decision about euthanasia. We worry about how we're going to pay the vet bills. We worry about whether or not our animals are suffering or whatever it may be. And when we worry, we're turning on the exact same physiological response as if there were a real threat to our survival. So we're going into fight or flight just because of what we're thinking. And that means that we are chronically provoking our stress response, and that can be really problematic for us. And so when we are chronically activated, it leads us into this state of overwhelm where everything, there's a typo in there. Every little thing is a big deal, right? Everything is the last straw. We become much more reactive. We start to see things differently. Our perceptions get narrow and skewed towards the negative. We have a lot more drama and conflict in our lives. We are ruminating. We can't stop thinking about worries. We get stuck in those loops. We start making bad self-care choices, and we do things that we really regret. We behave in ways that we are not proud of when we're in this state of overwhelm. And so it's really important that we back ourselves out of overwhelm. For those of you who work with dogs, it's like trigger stacking. We need to back ourselves away from threshold so that we're not always about to go over it and lose it and lunge at the end of our leash. And so self-regulation is really the skill of being able to ground ourselves so that we have time to think about, how do I really want to behave in this moment? Or and one way that we do that is whenever we notice that our stress response has been activated, or we're engaging with something we know is a predictable stressor for us, that we stop, that we slow ourselves down, that we stop talking, we stop moving, and we just take a breath. We pause to collect ourselves, to calm our stress response, observing what's going on internally and externally. And then we can proceed in a way that we can be proud of, that is, where we're thinking clearly and we're behaving in a way that is kind towards those around us. For many of us, we need more specific tools to self-regulate. And so often focused breathing is a simple way to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and repair branch of our autonomic nervous system. And so if you'd like to give this a try, I'm sure many of you have done it before. There's a simple breathing technique called box breathing or 4-square breathing. And it can be very helpful in helping us to calm ourselves down, but also to focus more clearly on what's happening. And so if you'd like to give it a try, it's really simple. We just breathe in through our nose to the count of 4, hold it in for 4, exhale through our mouth for 4, stay empty for 4, and repeat. And again, if you don't want to do this, if focusing on your breath makes you more anxious, then let's skip it and we'll have something for you on the next slide. But if you'd like to give it a try, you can breathe in now through your nose, 3, 4, hold it all in, 3, 4, exhale through your mouth, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Then go ahead and do a round or 2 on your own. Find the pace that feels good for you. I'll do the same. And whenever you're ready, you can just come back to breathing normally. So I don't know how that felt for you. For me, it always just slows me down just a little bit, helps me back away from that sense of overwhelm from my threshold. But focusing on your breath isn't always, the right choice for everybody. Sometimes it can make us feel more anxious, or we might be really overwhelmed, and it's just not the tool in the moment that's going to be the most helpful. So in that case, if you're feeling really emotionally overwhelmed, or breathing isn't a great choice for you, orienting yourself to your environment can be a powerful way to tell your body that you are safe and that you don't need your fight or flight response to kick in or stay activated. And so we'll give it a try now. I'd like for you to look around your room, right? Behind you, above you, and just notice, what do you see? What are you smelling right now? What can you hear besides my voice? And maybe what's the temperature like in the room that you're in? And I'd love for you to share it in the chat, because we're spending so much time online where we used to be in the same room together. And one of the ways that we can self-regulate is actually to co-regulate. We kind of feel each other's nervous systems, and we're all in the same space, hearing the same things and smelling the same things. And so we have a connection in the space that we're in, but we haven't had that for the last year, doing everything online. So if you want to share a few words about what it is like to be where you are, using your senses to really take in your current environment. I'd love to know what it's like where you are. So it's a little too cold, your dog is snoring, the artwork is beautiful, and you smell your unpleasant hand lotion, right? So that's what it's like to be in Ava's world right now, right? So I, for a while, was hearing Boogie have a dream, although it's finally quieted down. It's nice and warm in my house right now because I have the heat jacked up. Let's see, Lisa can see your cat sleeping on a chair next to you, hear your roosters and sparrows, and you smell nature's miracle. I am sure you're not the only one smelling that right now. The sun is shining through the windows of your office, and you can see your 12-year-old Jax at your feet. Yeah, what are some of the sounds that you all are hearing? Some of us are hearing birds snoring. Let's see, sleeping kittens, a noisy air conditioner, the happy scent of shelter dogs. I love that. You can hear them barking. The blinking voicemail light on your phone, that will set off your stress response, or at least it does for me. I notice that provokes a fight or flight response, just those notifications. You can hear men working in the crawl space 2 floors down and the wind blowing. Your old dog is sleeping on the sofa and needs a diaper change. That is a very specific smell that I think a lot of us can relate to. Your clock is ticking, dog snoring, washing machine. You're comfortable, you can hear a plane or see a plane, sausage and guitars. Sounds like a interesting place where you're at, more interesting than where I am, Jeff. So, okay, thank you. So this is just a way for us to check in with each other, but also can be a really powerful thing to do if you feel overwhelmed, particularly about future thoughts, thinking about all the worries that you have about your pet, or if you are really feeling emotional and it's not the right time. So, there are times when I'm going to cry and it's just not the right time. Maybe it's during a euthanasia at the shelter or something like that. I find it very, very helpful to look around the space that I'm in and to list 20 or 30 or 40 things that I can see. So as simple as saying, phone, keyboard, water glass, cords, photos, light, picture frame, cat, calendar. It's very simple. But in the process of doing that, you're helping your prefrontal cortex come back online because it's bumped offline when you're in fight or flight. And you're helping to get yourself grounded in the present moment, the safety of the space that you're in. If the environment that you're in is not safe, then this is not a great pick. But a lot of times the fight or flight response is being created by anticipating the future, worried thoughts. We're not really present. And so this seems so simple that most of us won't do it, but I cannot tell you how many times it has saved me to just list everything I can see in the room, or to just use my 5 senses as a way to bring myself back into the present moment and calm my stress response down. The other thing we need to do is, after the stressful thing has ended, we typically have a lot of cortisol and adrenaline in our body from all of this activation, and we need to move it out of our body so that we can rest. And so we can do that by crying, drinking a lot of water, exercising, dancing, but also we can just look at our dogs and remember that shaking is a really, really great way to move some stress out of our bodies. So, I use my dog as kind of like a cue. Whenever I see him shake himself off, I just give myself a shake, whether I notice that I'm feeling stress or not. I just make the assumption that I've got a lot of stress hormones pumping through my body that I need to metabolize out. And so it can be as simple as just really shaking your hands, or letting it go all the way into your arms. If you want to do this with me now, it can wake you up. If you're feeling sleepy listening to me, if you're standing up, you can get one leg into the mix at a time. And this can also be a powerful way to get back into your body if you're really in those future oriented or past oriented worries. If you feel very overwhelmed by something, this can also kind of help bring you back into the present. It does tend to wake you up, so it's not very calming, but it is a way to bring yourself back into the moment, into the safety of your body, and it's moving some of that stress out, so that after you have vigorously shaked your arms and legs for a minute or so, you can really know that you have metabolized out some of that accumulated stress in your body. Putting on some music and just dancing around and singing are other really great ways to just move all of that stress out. And when we do that, it really, again, takes us out of that state of overwhelm that really contributes to us feeling terrible and behaving in ways we're not so proud of. So the second strategy is just basic self-care. Self-care gets a really bad rap as being selfish, particularly when an animal is suffering and he needs us. We might feel guilty or selfish taking care of ourselves. But if you remember that compassion fatigue is really a profound state of depletion, self-care is really just about replenishing ourselves. It's as neutral as energy management. We need to replenish all of the energy that we use caring for our animals, coping with the stress of this pandemic. And so it doesn't need to be such a loaded thing. It can just simply be how we replenish ourselves. And I really want to encourage you not to underestimate the very, very basic self-care. We're always looking for more complicated, flashy, exciting, hacks and fixes for self-care. But the truth is most of us would really benefit from better sleep, eating healthier foods, drinking more water, and exercising a little bit more. And if any one of those four areas is kind of missing in your life, that's where we should be putting some attention. When we're not getting enough sleep, our stress response is activated. When our blood sugar is not balanced because we're not eating well or enough, our stress response gets activated. When we're dehydrated, our stress response gets activated. When we're not exercising, we're kind of stewing and pickling in all of those stress hormones. So when we are thinking of how to take care of ourselves so that we can continue to be good personal or professional caregivers, those basics are everything. We really benefit so much from that very, very simple foundational care. And so, please just pay attention to and tend to your biological needs throughout the day. It goes a really, really long way, particularly if you're used to always focusing externally on the animals and people that you're caring for. Taking some of that awareness and placing it on yourself, noticing when you're hungry, noticing when you're thirsty, noticing that you have to go to the bathroom and allowing yourself to do it really does make a big difference. It doesn't have to be any fancier than that. And please, if you are not getting enough sleep at night because you're bottle feeding or your senior dog is getting up a lot in the middle of the night, see if you can sneak in some naps because we really need as much sleep as we can get to be well. Our third strategy is active coping, right? We need to find a way to cope with the really difficult emotions that we're experiencing. And so we're going to flesh this out a little bit. But when we're thinking about active coping skills, we're really looking at, well, how do we address the parts of the problem that we do have some control over? How do we make the best of the situation by seeing it with a different perspective? How do we accept the reality of what we can't control without blaming ourselves? Can we seek more support and guidance? And how do we express these feelings so we're not bottling them all up? So that first bit is we need to really know and be clear about what is within our control and what is not in our control. And again, when it's something that we have some control over, that is stressing us, let's tackle that. Let's find out if there's a different treatment or if there's a different product that could help us, or if there's anything that we can do to control the situation itself to reduce our stress and their suffering. Let's do it. But a lot of times, the only thing that we have control over when something is really challenging is ourselves, taking care of ourselves, where we place our attention, what we focus on, how we care for ourselves so that we can bring our best to the situation. And so one of the things that we have control over is our perspective. And often when we're feeling really negative, when we're feeling really compassion fatigued, when we're experiencing a lot of stress, our perception just gets more and more and more narrow, and everything feels very, very negative. We have a negativity bias in our brains to begin with, and it's just exacerbated when we're under a lot of stress and pressure. And so we can really get stuck in only seeing the bad around us all the time. And I'm not in any way telling anybody to think positive thoughts only. We need to see and feel and think about the negative, but it can become like a quicksand, or a rabbit hole that we fall down where it's all negative all the time. And that's not accurate either. And it often will sap our energy and make us even more stressed. So we just want to counterbalance the negative with some of the positive. And that really can increase our energy and our ability to keep showing up to care every day. So making an effort to just notice what's going right, even on the toughest days, and what you're grateful for. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that after my pets have passed, knowing that I appreciated them while they were here, that I was able to be with them even on those really hard days, and that we had those good moments, and that I knew that I was having the good moment with them when I was having it, right? That I was present in the moment and feeling that gratitude or feeling that love and connection, that I knew it in the moment. That has provided me with a tremendous amount of comfort after they have passed. So this can really help us, I think, in the moment, but also in the future as well, in terms of having guilt or regrets. So really making a point to notice the good as well. And then we have to find, a way to accept that there's so much of this that's out of our control. And the good old serenity prayer is always there to help remind us that, I think we need some grace and support in our lives, to grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot control, courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this is just such a powerful reminder to have, taped on our fridge whenever we're going through something difficult. Of course, when we have to accept that there are difficult things in our lives, we're going to have a lot of emotions about this. And there are no bad feelings, there are no negative feelings, there just are feelings. And feelings are there for a reason. They're there to be felt. They are signposts to help us figure out what we need and what we value in our lives. And so we can help ourselves by allowing our feelings to exist and not trying to bottle them up all the time. But we also do need to find a way to constructively express them, or express them in a way that is helpful for us and not harmful. And that's going to be different for each one of us. For some of us, it's prayer or it's meditation. For some of us, it's talking to a trusted friend or counselor, or going to that AA meeting, or talking to your pastor or your rabbi. For some of us, it's creative arts and expressive arts, collage and painting, or dance or singing. And for some of us, it's even long distance running can be a way to express your feelings. I have never experienced that, but I hear that that is possible. For me and for many others, journal writing can be a way to express everything that I'm feeling and move it through me so that it's not all bottled up. But we do need to find a way to allow our feelings to be present and express them. And when we do that, it decreases our stress and fatigue, because it actually takes a lot of energy to bottle up and avoid everything that we're feeling. That being said, there are times when our mind just needs a break. We can't shut it off. No amount of deep breathing or journal writing is getting our mind to, quiet down. And so sometimes we need just to give ourselves a break by allowing ourselves to get lost in a positive activity, something that's really distracting, grabs our attention. So for a lot of people, that's something like reading or watching a mystery, movie, or watching comedy or stand up, something where we start laughing, playing an instrument, something where it's challenging enough that we have to put our focus on it, but not so challenging that we feel frustrated by it. And when it's something positive, when we can laugh or, kind of relax or play for a little while, not only does it stop our mind from thinking about and obsessing about whatever we're worried about, but the positive thing starts to generate a different physiological response. We start to actually feel better, have different emotions. And then when we come back to whatever was stressing us out, we feel better. We have resourced ourselves to deal with that. So for me, when Penelope was really at her worst with a lot of the care, and it was just really overwhelming and intense, sometimes I would go to the movies like on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, so that for 2 or 3 hours I could just be lost in a story for a little while, knowing she's home, she's safe, and I can just lose myself in a movie for a while. And then I would come back feeling like my fuse was much longer. I had what I needed to be there to do the difficult work. It can also just be sometimes you need to place your brain on something where you run a list in your mind of all 50 states or football teams, or give yourself something constructive to do, like clean a junk drawer out or scoop the poop in your backyard, or whatever it is, where at the end of it you've completed something. You have control over that junk drawer. It's over when you're done with it. You've made a change. And so sometimes we just need to give our brain a little something to work at for a while so it can take a break, and then we shift internally. Our fourth strategy is social support. Social support really is the biggest mitigator for stress in our lives. And so that's partly due to the fact that one of our stress responses is called tend and befriend. So we have fight, flight, freeze, and tend and befriend. And this can be a very positive way of coping with stress, where we tend to those that we love and we befriend others and get social support. And when we're around safe, caring people and animals in our lives, we experience a release of oxytocin, that happiness hormone, the bonding hormone, which research now shows interrupts the stress response and prevents the damage that is done by the stress response. So oxytocin becomes the antidote to cortisol. Connection really does heal us. And so this is really something we need more of in our lives because of all of the stress that we're experiencing, not just with our pets, but in general. And so what does that look like? It's challenging because of COVID, but having someone that you can talk to, where you decide ahead of time that you're going to buddy up and listen to each other, where there's an agreement that you're not asking for advice. It's not about fixing each other, but it's really just about holding some space and allowing the other person or yourself to share, can be a really powerful way to cope together. Allowing other people to help you so you can take a break. It's been challenging with COVID, but I know as a dog walker, I've been back into people's homes. Can you have a pet sitter or a dog walker to relieve you from a caregiving shift so you can take a break? Or just, having someone come over and help you clean the house or listen or whatever it is. We're also uncomfortable asking for help, but people like to help. We like to help. And so, to allow yourself to ask for and accept help can be a way to really manage your stress. There are groups that offer, targeted support, support groups for people who live with animals who have serious behavior issues, or grief groups, or whatever it may be, including counselors that are really good at respecting that human animal bond, can be a way to get that kind of safe connection. Walking and talking can be pretty great. So walking and talking on the phone, or if you're able to be back in person with someone, walking side by side. The walking helps to discharge some of the stress activation in your body while you're talking. And then just pausing for good, long hugs. We need about a 20-second hug or more to start to feel the benefits, like the oxytocin and that steadiness that we get from a good hug from someone else. So allow yourself to lean in for a big, long hug. And then our fifth strategy is really underlying all of this, which is we need to have a lot of compassion for ourselves. I really encourage you to just be a good friend to yourself during all of this. It's really, really challenging what's happening at work, in our greater lives with COVID, and what's happening in your home with your own pet. So, treat yourself the way that you would treat a good friend who is going through this. We're often our harshest critics, and we're so hard on ourselves, but we can really become more better caregivers by being kind to ourselves. And part of self-compassion is really just acknowledging why we need compassion, which is that we're going through a loss, whether that is a loss of their youth and their ability to do things, the loss that is anticipated, or the loss that is currently happening because they have passed on. And so David Kessler is a grief expert who reminds us that there's something really powerful about naming what we're experiencing as grief. And what he was talking about here is COVID, that we're actually experiencing a lot of grief around what we have lost in our lives through the pandemic. But it also applies to, I think, the end of life with an animal or their senior years. There's a lot of subtle and not so subtle experiences of grief. And so it helps us to feel what's inside of us when we name it, which is really powerful. Just naming that I notice that I'm feeling sad. I notice that I'm feeling grief right now. That allows us to feel it. And then it moves through us instead of getting so bottled up and stuck. And so he reminds us that it's really important to acknowledge what we're going through. And that, I think, is a really self-compassionate approach that helps us to become more resilient. And sometimes when things are just going wrong, maybe you were really overwhelmed by stress, and then you were really short-tempered with your pet, which that is just the worst feeling in the world, when you lose your patience with your animal, right? Maybe you yelled at them, or you jerk on their leash, or whatever it is. We just instantly feel horrible when we have done something like this. Know that when we behave in ways that are out of line with our values, this is because our stress response has really hijacked us. And to respond to yourself with some compassion, what you're going through is really hard. And everybody who's going through it has moments where they're just beside themselves, or they can't believe that they just did what they did, or they're really struggling to get through it. And to, instead of beating yourself up for it, to just be a good friend to yourself in that moment. That kindness, when we offer it to ourselves, allows us to do better next time. Beating ourselves up for it doesn't actually stop us from doing it again, right? It's like positive. We want to have positive reinforcement for ourselves instead of punishment. And so a really um, good way to bring self-compassion into our behavior is to, whenever we notice that we're really suffering, is literally just to ask ourselves, what do I need in this moment? Right? And often our emotions can tell us what it is that we need. So, and it, or it may be our body needs something. Maybe you need um, some water, or you need to rest, or you need to talk to a friend. But to just ask yourself and then see if you can give even 1% of that to yourself in that moment. And the way that you talk to yourself when you're having these really difficult moments, it matters. The tone that we take with ourselves really does have an impact on how we feel. So again, talk to yourself the way maybe that you would talk to your pet or a kid, or again, your best friend. And this doesn't, this really helps to give you the resources that you need to keep going. So our resilience is really based on us having compassion for ourselves as well. The other thing we can do is to literally soothe our nervous system through soothing touch. And this can also release oxytocin. So if you're alone, we're still able to kind of give ourselves this little happiness boost. But a simple thing to do is just to put your hands over your heart. So if you want to, take your right hand and put it on your chest with your fingertips kind of by your collarbone, and then your left hand on top of your right hand, and just apply a little bit of pressure, whatever feels good. You can just feel into the warmth of your hands and that nice steady pressure on your chest. What you're doing right now is self-compassionate touch. It is, the warmth is soothing, but the pressure is also activating your parasympathetic nervous system, because you're pushing on something called your vagus nerve, which runs down the front of you. So when you press on your chest right here, you're pressing on the vagus nerve, and that activates your parasympathetic, or the rest and digest response. So this actually can calm you down. That's why weighted blankets can be really great. So if you're feeling really upset, a weighted blanket, or you're having trouble sleeping, humming and singing also activate your vagus nerve in your throat, and that can be a way to soothe yourself. And then doing child's pose, yoga pose, or legs up the wall. If you Google either one of them, you'll see how they work. But these can be very soothing poses that can help to activate your relaxation response and to help you calm down, feel safer, or to get to sleep if you're struggling with that at night. So we're going to wrap up in a minute, but I wanted to ask before we go, what's really helping you the most right now, whether that's what's helping you get through COVID, or what's helping you get through life as a caregiver to a senior animal, or an animal with behavior or medical challenges. What's really helping you to cope with the stress? And what I'll say while you're typing, and I hope that you add it into the chat, is that we don't stress out about things that we don't care about. It's because our pets mean so much to us that this is so stressful, and that meaning it, and the joy that we get from having them in our lives makes all of this stress and pain and suffering that we experience it worth it, because it's the price of admission that we're willing to pay to be in this beautiful, magical, wonderful relationship with these animals. So just as a reminder, that as difficult as it is, many of us wouldn't have it any other way, because it's what gives us access to all of the good stuff. And so that's just something to remember on those days that feel really terrible, that this is the two sides of the coin. So yeah, Insight meditation app has been really great. Coloring, audiobooks, chatting with understanding family and friends, watching the sunrise and the sunset. I love that. Walking in nature, sewing, crafting, art therapy, walking your dog, knowing your time limits and sticking to them. Yeah, weekend beach time. Yeah, these are all really great. Bird watching has been massively helpful for me this last year. I feel like I owe every bird in my backyard a stimulus check. They've been really helpful. Board games with your husband, cuddling your dogs before getting out of bed. Something that was really helpful for me has been is I have a gratitude journal. I don't actually write in it that often, but every once in a while I do. And what's been really helpful for me as my pets get older and they pass is to be able to look back at all of those entries where I was, again, in that moment, I could see that I was aware of how much I love them and enjoyed them and all of those little things. So gratitude journals aren't a fix for everything, but they can be really helpful. Sitting around the pool with your dogs while they run around, chat groups with friends in Australia and Europe, foster kittens, yay for foster kittens, your other animals, and ordering your environment. Yeah, absolutely. Cleaning out my closets has been a big one during COVID for sure. Yeah. And so I hope that something today has been helpful for you. Not everything is going to be what you need, but I hope that there's something that you can take away today that might make what you're going through a little bit easier. So just to recap, self-regulation is a way to steady yourself to get you out of that chronically activated stress response so that you can think clearly and feel more connected and just feel better overall. Self-care, it does not have to be complicated. Just get back to your biological basics. They make a really big difference. See about shifting how you cope to be more active and more intentional. You know, to have a plan about what we're going to do to invite some help in. And that goes to social support that we really can reduce our stress and help repair the stress that we experience by being in connection and community with safe people. And then to please, just no matter what, have self-compassion to be a good friend to yourself during this really difficult time. So that is all for today. I'm happy to take any questions that you have, but I want you to know that you can also email me at any time at jessica@jessicadolce.com. And you can see more about my work and free resources at jessicadolce.com as well. So I'll stick around to see if anybody has any questions. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was really, really helpful and informative. And I think all the participation from our audience was terrific. We really appreciate you tuning in and sharing your experiences and your thoughts. Are there any last questions that you're seeing in the chat box, Jessica?
No, but thank you everybody. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. And we will be sharing the recording of this webinar. So please be on the lookout for that and have a great weekend and rest of the day. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jessica. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks everybody. Take good care.
Okay. Bye-bye.